This is Harmony, a Unitarian Universalist community. We are a lay-led congregation based in the northeast suburbs of Cincinnati, balancing faith and reason since 2009.
So I am very excited. We do still try and make a great effort to have guest speakers at some of the best services we have here, and I think today will be no exception. Hopefully, some of you got a chance to see the email and watch the video before today's service. If not, it's not going to ruin anything for you without it. It's good background and fodder to head into this. And just to say that, as typical, when we go in discussion, we're not going to split up to do discussion when we have a guest speaker. She's going to sort of run the discussion amongst all of us here, so we could all get a chance to interact with Joan. And so without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our speaker. So she is the executive director of UU Justice Ohio, which includes UU The Vote, and she's also the chair of the registration team of the nonpartisan Ohio Voter Outreach Committee. Sits on the NOVOC Minority Outreach, which is also the non-Ohio Voter Outreach Commission, steering and education teams. Before working for the UUJO, she was a Central East regional lead for the Ohio Meadville District Executive, and she lives in Columbus, Ohio, with her spouse, Jerry, and 4 furry felines, all named after Hebrew Bible prophets and royalty. So please welcome Reverend Joan here, and I'm gonna attempt to hand over control of the screen to her so that she can lead the presentation.
All right, absolutely excellent. Okay, so thank you for having me here this morning. This is really great. Just to let you guys know, normally what I'm about to talk about and engage with y'all in conversation is a 90-minute workshop kind of thing. But since many of you have seen the video in advance, we don't have to show that again. And the conversation, it depends on you all and how long you take, but I'll try to keep things within the parameters of your time limit. We're going to be talking about what keeps us up at night and why these issues that make our lives difficult, why it's imperative to vote, because these issues are related directly to the choices we make on our social in our social system. Just to start with some words from the Representative John Lewis, whose passing we recently celebrated. He said that freedom's not a state, it's an act. It's not some enchanted garden perched high on a distant plateau where we can sit down and rest, but freedom is that continuous action that we all must take. And each generation, including us, must do our part to create an even more fair and more just society. And our argument here today is that doing our part means not just voting, not just helping others register to vote, but also generating enthusiasm among all the folk you know to get out and vote, whether that be by absentee ballot or safely in person. So that's why we're here. Talk about what keeps us up at night, about the impact of voting in our personal lives. It's not just out there somewhere, it impacts us personally. Looking at the reality of voting in Ohio in 2020, including the threats to our elections. If we have some time, we can even show you how to check your registration status afterwards and make sure you have not been purged. Yes, people get purged all the time in Ohio voting lists. And then I'm going to ask you at the end to think about volunteering, to help inform others, to register others, and to support voter turnout, despite the COVID-19, for safe and fair elections in our state. Now, voting really is the only way we have of expressing our people power as a collective. And there's all kinds of reasons why people say they don't vote. They don't think it'll count. Well, we have seen in recent elections that even just a couple of votes in a county can really add up across the state. We've seen that in Georgia. We saw that happen in Wisconsin. And, you know, we're going to be seeing it this time as well. So our vote does count. Sometimes people haven't registered because they don't know the system. They don't know how to register online, for example. And I'm going to give you a real quick and easy website that you can direct folk to and ask them to register, and it'll guide them through it, okay? Because you can register online in Ohio. You can't get an absentee ballot application online. I mean, you can't, you know, submit it online, but you can register online. And, you know, when people are uncertain about a process, they'll stay home. They won't vote. They won't go to the polls when it's safe, or they won't do the absentee ballot because they don't know the process. And so it really behooves us as folk that, you know, care to learn the processes and help others. Some people don't register for fear of jury duty. I have heard that from a ton of young adults lately. And truth of the matter is, in Ohio, jury pools are also drawn from the driving records. So, you know, the driver's license rolls. So if you drive, you're in the jury pool already. And then, of course, registration can be incorrect for some reason. If we have moved recently and not updated our registration, that can cause troubles as well. And then others just don't believe in the system. They don't believe in the system. They say, well, Bernie's not on the polls, you know, Bernie's not up for election, so I'm not going to vote for anybody. But if you don't vote, you are making a choice. You are choosing the status quo. So if you don't vote, you are actually voting for and choosing the status quo. Because voting really is our right. And it's the only real clear way we have of taking care of ourselves, our families, and really our needs as a larger society. Because we want you to vote. But more than that, we want you to advocate to help others in this process, to reach out to everyone you know. And, you know, really impact on them the fact that it's not just the president. It is judges, it is prosecutors, it is city attorneys, council people, state lawmakers, school levies, all of that local voting, all those local voting issues that really impact our daily lives. And we have to think about those. You know, it impacts housing, income support, welfare, food stamps, Medicare for those of us of an older age, Medicaid, schools, the courts, you know, of course, our children, Head Start, things like that, transportation, adult education, jobs, job training, unemployment that so many people need right now. All of these things are impacted by our vote at the local level, at the state level, and of course at the national level. So, you know, they say that Tip O'Neill, the famous speaker Tip O'Neill, said that all politics is local. That was actually coined by a reporter back in 1923, but Tip O'Neill made it famous, and he was right, because it won't make any difference who's president if the state and local officials are really working against your interest. And here in Ohio, we have seen a real example of that in the recent scandal that has come out at our Ohio State House, where the representative speaker, Larry Householder, was arrested, and other people, about 21 legislators are implicated in bribery scandals that resulted in the passage of House Bill 6 that protects the coal-fired plants and the nuclear power plants, as well as possibly Senate Bill 33 that was up for vote in the House and then the Senate, that would prevent us from protesting at pipelines and other oil and gas infrastructure. That one got held up. That one's in limbo now. But these are the kinds of These are the kinds of things that happen at the local level, at the state house level, that are impacted by the way we vote. So let me just ask you guys, what keeps you up at night personally? What things affect your daily life? And you can unmute and speak, or you can put it into the chat if you like. What keeps you up at night?
Racial equity is one for me that definitely keeps me up at night.
What was that, hon?
Racial equity.
A racial equity. And how does that impact you personally?
Well, my kids are Black, so it does impact me personally, but
Okay.
just wanting everyone to be fair and, like you said, to be able to protest peacefully and not be afraid of getting grabbed by a federal agent.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, it can be very personal for some folk. Others, what keeps you up at night? Mitch McConnell keeps you up at night. Okay, Bruce just said. Well, but what is it about Mitch McConnell that keeps you up at night?
I'm working for the census right now, and I am appalled at what is being done to the accuracy and the fairness and to the census. They have cut in half the amount of time they're going to spend collecting doing door knocking.
Yeah.
Because they want to complete it in a timely manner. But what it really means is that they will undercount marginalized communities, which are the hardest to count. And they have, the administration has written an executive order that says that they will remove undocumented people from the final census by comparing other databases to what comes out in the census report. And they're going to do this, for apportionment, for deciding who gets votes, not for who builds roads. They're only going to do it. It goes back to the citizenship question. And it's too complicated. I'm sorry. But I am appalled, and it is being done so that the current president will be able to accomplish this before he leaves office, even if he is defeated.
And how does that affect you personally?
Your
family?
I am working for the census. I am part of this. I feel like I am contributing in a way. I'm not, because I'm trying to do it the best way I can, but I'm implicit if I don't quit.
Yep. No, I understand then. And then somebody else, Karen, said climate change. But what is it about climate change that's affecting us personally? I'll tell you, it affects me personally because I have lifelong asthma. And as the climate becomes worse and ozone layers or ozone levels rise and various particulate matters rise, I can't breathe. But how does climate change affect you?
This is Karen. I think I'm thinking of future generations and that this planet being unlivable for my children and grandchildren. So it's more about trying to do things now so that not only for myself, but I don't know that it's affecting me personally right now. I'm worried about the future and
Well, it does affect your prices at the grocery store. It affects the availability of many of the fruits and vegetables and grains that we consume. So that's all tied there too. I mean, we feel it in our pocketbooks when climate change is destroying, the gardens in the western states and, ravaging some of the southern peach crops and things like that.
Yeah, the way I look at it is, there's a lot of issues, a lot of things we need to be working on, but if we don't have a planet to live on, that's kind of a problem.
Kind of does it, yeah. I see a lot of people are very worried about Donald Trump and what would happen if he were to become president again. And the question then is, once again, what is it that is impacting you and your family? Does anybody want to speak up on that?
Just real quickly, as an LGBTQ couple,
Yeah.
they're already working to take away rights, and it's just going to keep going in the next administration. So that definitely impacts me personally.
That's very personal. It's very personal. And same with Supreme Court. I see some concern about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Okay. But what I'm hoping you'll see is that these are not just issues in what I want to say. These are not just issues on paper. They're not just things you hear on the news. These are issues that impact all of us on a daily basis. And that's what we have to be thinking about. If we're going to brave COVID-19 to go out and vote, or to help others vote, or go to the problem and process of the absentee ballot process, which is confusing for a lot of folk. But if we're going to go that extra step to vote this time, it's because we realize that it impacts us on our daily lives in very real ways. And yes, loss of Obamacare for those of us with pre-existing conditions. Exactly. Exactly. Childhood trauma, the effects on future mental health. I mean, these are things that we have to think about. So just know that this is not something that is just on paper, or something you just read about, or something that makes great headlines. This is personal. This is personal. And just to show some of the things that keep us up at night, Medicare, Medicaid, these are some of the things other people have said. Homelessness, families and children that are hungry, and there's a growing need for helping support folk with food banks right now. Here at UJO, we have a food bank for immigrant undocumented families in Columbus, and we've grown from supporting 50 families to 500 right now. Healthcare, the loss of hospitals across the state in rural areas. In the environment, its impact on us, children, student debt, job loss, COVID-19. How are we going to resume our lives after all of this? The post office even, and how it's being defunded, because we need the post office for the communications. Son Rowan wants you all to know that waking up and playing keeps him up at night. Yes, it does too. That's very true. Thank you. Thank you, Rowan.
Hey, Joan.
Yes.
This is Brandon, and I saw a comment earlier that really resonated with me, and that was that
Good.
what keeps me up at night is those that are in power trying to manipulate power so they can retain that. And it's kind of along the lines that John mentioned earlier. It's going to be a scary time if we do see Trump not reelected. Is he going to transition power, gently, or is there going to be some sort of conflict that comes out there? I personally am not worried about the election for me as an individual. I am financially secure. I am straight. I am white. I am all those things. And to me, it's not so much about my own personal interest, but I'm seeing what I think of as injustice. And that video I watched this morning is still raw in my mind right now. And just thinking about how there's probably going to be manipulation coming up with this election. And it's that, again, that manipulation that's out there. And I'll accept either sides of issues. On many issues, I can be flexible. But when it's manipulating the system, that's what really scares me. It makes me think that we don't really have control of this country like we think we do. We pretend that we have it through voting, but if it's being manipulated by things that we saw in that movie, then you don't really have control.
Well, and just to bring it down local again, this is what the whole scandal in the Ohio House of Representatives is all about right now, manipulating that system so that supporters of Householder could get elected by channeling money, laundering money through the system so that they would have more in their campaign chests to get elected in our Ohio counties. So, it's not just what's happening in Washington or abstract. That's very real for us. And so we have to be watching on that one coming up this election as well. Manipulation takes place at all levels. The slide I have up right now is just some Ohio facts too, about the poverty in Ohio, which is 41%. 41%, and this was before COVID-19. Now it's greater. 41% are poor, low-income people. Of course, we have a high rate of folk incarcerated. At Ohio minimum wage, it takes 74 hours of work in a week to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. So that's why people are working 2 and 3 jobs. And 22.3 million folk earn below $15 an hour. And then we even back in 2016 took away same-day registration, which impacted low-income voters and voters of color more so than anybody else. So those are just some of the issues. And that's why it's important for us to take the time to speak up and vocalize these issues that are making our lives difficult. We have to speak up about these things and realize that it's all interconnected. It's all intersectional. And do not be silent, as Howard Thurman said, because there is no limit to the power that may be released through you. So moving on then, talking about our elections coming up, the fact that suppression is very real. We may say it doesn't happen in Ohio, but it does. It isn't just Georgia. It isn't just Wisconsin. It's us too. Ohio and Georgia have the same use it or lose it laws, which purge voters from registration if they haven't participated in an election lately. We know that 774 Floridians with felonies were granted the right to vote and then forbidden to vote unless they pay all past fines and penalties. So essentially, they cannot vote in this election. Pennsylvania right now is being sued to stop its use of mail-in ballot drop boxes, to reduce it to just 1 per county in some of those huge Pennsylvania counties. There is actually a $20 million national strategy right now by some conservative forces that are filing dozens of lawsuits to limit access to the ballot, all made possible because in 2013, the Supreme Court reversed Shelby County versus Holder, which said that states with the longest histories of discrimination no longer had to get approval for voting changes. There is a national effort out there by conservative groups to restrict our voting rights, and it is playing out in Ohio and across the country right now in over 130 lawsuits as tracked by the Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. And we had an example here, House Bill 680. House Bill 680, which tried to restrict our right for absentee ballots, and we were able to stop that and get rid of the worst of it with amendment, and now it's sitting once again in limbo in the House and the Senate because nothing is moving right now. Thank God. Also, 3 Republican groups have sent out warning letters to scores of election officials demanding that they purge their rolls of ineligible voters. And in some cases, they've even filed lawsuits. So these groups are sending out warning letters to counties throughout any of the swing states like Ohio and telling them they need to purge. And we know here in Ohio, inconsistent record keeping, inaccurate voter registration software is making it very, very difficult for our boards of election to conduct their registrations really effectively or efficiently. And purges across 88 boards of elections have had problems in the past. Once again, in Shelby County, the Board of Elections back in 2019 said they had purged over 800 voters, but they could only provide a list of 210. What happened to the other 600 voters? Secretary of State LaRose said that our county-by-county voter registration in Ohio is a mess of inconsistent data. And there is a big article on that I have the website on there if you care to look at that. Okay. Let me tell you a little story about this one. Now we know Ohio purges inactive voters. And they purged 267,000 back in January in 2019. Second purge was planned for September in 2019. But the Dispatch newspaper identified more than 1,600 active voters who were incorrectly marked for purging. Some had voted as recently as 2018. And then in Columbus, you know, the election officials themselves said, oh, we better take a look at this. And they found another 1,000 folk that had been flagged for purging who had actually signed petitions, which is counted as participation. And even with these discoveries, however, Secretary LaRose did not work to check if any similar errors had included in that big purge back in January 2019, which is why even to this day, people that thought they were registered are not. People that voted in 2018 have been purged. And so that's why we urge everybody to check their voter registration regularly. Now, as you were looking at the video earlier, usually I ask people, how do you react to the possibility of voter suppression in Ohio? To think about how this might impact you and your family. What questions do you have about being able to vote in the next election? And those are the questions to ask yourself as you view that video about Georgia. Now, I'm going to show you a couple of short videos, like minutes or so, 8 minutes on one, that kind of summarize what was in the Georgia video, so that those of you who haven't seen it yet will understand a bit of what's going on.
Well, democracy.
The purging and the voter suppression has been so intense that we have Donald Trump in the White House right now. That's the power of voter suppression.
The numbers in the 2016 election, especially in and around the black vote, were really interesting. You saw in key states, in swing states, where voter turnout dropped from, it may have been like 78,000 people turning out and dropped to below 50,000, or, you know, you saw drastic drops. Now, some people have argued that that was because Hillary Clinton didn't motivate black voters to come out. But you've looked at the data, you've analyzed a lot of the information, and it seems like there's been a systematic effort to remove people of color from the voting rolls.
Right.
But why people of color, though?
And I believe why people of color, besides being just snide and saying, duh, it's been that way for a long time, it's because that after the 2008 election with Barack Obama brought 15 million new voters to the polls with that incredible ground game.
Wow.
They were overwhelmingly black, Latino, young, poor, and with that, then the Republican Party that has moved further and further to the right and has become more and more white, and their policies have become more right-wing. They don't have policies that resonate with the growing diversity of America.
Right.
And so instead of thinking about how do we reform this party so that it resonates with America, that our policies are really strong, and talk about benefiting more Americans, instead what they decided to do was to suppress the vote.
There are some really scary parts of the book where I read about things I never knew before. I knew about the larger picture of voter suppression in certain states, in certain places. Mm-hmm. But you read about how so many people have been stripped of their rights. Now, the argument the other way from people like Chris Kobach, you know, from Donald Trump and his team has been, we are protecting democracy. That's why we scrub people of voter rolls. If they've died, if they no longer respond to mail, then why are we keeping them on the voter rolls? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, and I respond to that because one of the ways that this works and why it's so effective is that they're able to use that cover of being reasonable. You know, we're just keeping the voter rolls up. But when you really look at what they're doing, is that the people that they're scrubbing, they're not scrubbing people who have moved or who have died overwhelmingly. Overwhelmingly, who they're scrubbing are people who are African Americans, people who are young, people who are poor. And they're doing it by the characteristics. So they can't say, oh, we don't want black people to vote, because there's still this thing called the 15th Amendment. Right. Although the Voting Rights Act got gutted by the Supreme Court, there's still this thing called the 15th Amendment. So what they do is they go after the characteristics of a people, societally imposed characteristics. They go after those things like if you move a lot, and we know that people move a lot, particularly if you're poor, you don't stay in the same house forever. Right. That moving then becomes a reason to knock people off the rolls. They say, and one of the things that we also know, characteristics, is that young people, minorities, and students, they don't vote regularly. So they start knocking people off the rolls for not voting regularly. And so they use those characteristics, and those are the characteristics of people who don't overwhelmingly vote for Republicans.
Right.
Yeah.
When you look at the numbers and you look at how impactful this could actually be, the argument is always met with, yes, but look at how much voter fraud there is. Now, we talked briefly about this, but overwhelmingly, most Americans believe that voter fraud is a very definite threat.
Absolutely. And that has been a well-cultivated myth. It was born up out of the 2000 election, that horrible election with hanging chads.
Right.
And that myth of massive rampant voter fraud coming out of the cities, stealing our elections. Except when they really went hunting for it, they couldn't find it. Justin Levitt, a law professor out of California, he looked, and he went from 2000 to 2014. Out of 1 billion votes, he was able to identify 31 cases. 31 out of 1 billion votes of voter impersonation fraud. When Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State that you mentioned, who helped head up Trump's Election Integrity Commission, in their report, which was all about when Trump said 5 million voters have come in and I would have won the popular vote.
That's a great Trump, by the way.
Thank you, thank you. It's not as good as yours. You know, when he said, you know, he's got 5 million, then they went hunting and they couldn't find it. I mean, the pages are blank. When it says voter fraud, his commission's looking, blank pages. It's not there. When Greg Abbott, out of Texas, is arguing for voter ID, and Judge Ramos is saying, okay, you've got rampant voter fraud. Where? And he's like, it's rampant. She's like, where? How many? It's a lot. Rampant. How many? 2. And I'm like, is that rampant?
The argument I've seen a lot of people parrot with a lot of confidence is, it's not suppression. What we're doing is making sure that the integrity of our election is maintained. And so they say, we're not purging people, or we're not restricting them from voting. We're just saying that everyone needs a voter ID. Now, I understand it, but if you were explaining to someone who is genuinely well-intentioned, someone who says, I don't understand, why is it so hard, or why is it so difficult for the government to say, why is it so bad for the government to say, everyone should have a voter ID that is issued by the government or at the DMV? Why is that so much to ask?
Okay, so let me just give you a couple of examples about how that really works. Because part of, again, the way that it sounds so reasonable, because you need an ID, you know, what Trump said, you need an ID to go buy groceries.
Right.
But as we all know, it doesn't quite work that way. So for instance, in Alabama said you got to have a government-issued photo ID. And then said, but your public housing ID does not count. Now, Alabama's a poor state. They've got lots of public housing. 71% of those in public housing in Alabama are African American. For many, that's the only ID they have. So you automatically wiped away that type of government-issued photo ID, because public housing is government-issued.
Right.
Okay. Then Alabama shut down the Department of Motor Vehicles in the Black Belt counties. And so now people are going to have to go 50 miles to get a driver's license. But if you don't drive, how are you going to go 50 miles? And you don't have public transportation. So what you do is you create an obstacle.
Right.
And then you create an obstacle to the obstacle. And you make it so difficult for people who are already working their hardest to make it, to now be able to just access their basic right to vote. We see this in state after state. North Carolina, the Fourth Circuit said, you have targeted African Americans with nearly surgical precision. So these states, they make it sound innocuous. Oh, you need an ID, but it's not any ID. In Indiana, you need to have a driver's license to get a birth certificate. But to get a birth certificate, you need a driver's license.
That's brilliant. Welcome.
Hey.
I think that mail-in...
Well, I know that time is short, so I won't show the other little film that I had about from Brave New Films, but check out the website, Brave New Films. I want you to put in the chat box just one word about how the idea of voter suppression makes you feel. If you saw the video, how did it make you feel? What is your one word reaction to that? Just type it in the chat box right now. Somebody says Trump doesn't buy his own groceries. Yeah. Angry, sick, infuriated, sad, powerless. Though we are not powerless, but livid, frustrated, disheartened. Again, more anger and frustration. Was anybody surprised to know about voter suppression?
Yeah, this is Brandon. I'll say aloud that watching that video again was, I know this kind of thing goes on at a high level or at some conceptual level, but to see how seemingly systematic they did it down in Georgia. And the other thing I think it's important too is it didn't completely happen just in since the 2016 election. This is a long-standing problem there.
Yep.
So yeah, a little surprising for sure.
Yep. And we do that here in Ohio by having fewer voting machines in some of the neighborhoods and some of the marginalized communities than we have in some of the white communities or the rich communities. That one is a very common voter suppression tactic. So something for you all to consider. And we need to consider what can we do here in Ohio to help prevent this from happening here. Once again, I know time is short, so I'll ask you to be thinking about that one on your own, because there are a number of things that we can do. In every county right now, we have different crews that are going to the boards of election, and they are talking with our boards of election about what are they going to do to meet the COVID-19 crisis? How are they providing for safe elections for those that need to vote in person? How are they handling the flood of absentee ballots that they're going to get? And how are they consolidating polling places? Because if you saw in the Georgia video, consolidating the voting places was the first and most insidious voter suppression tactic that they used, besides the purging. And here in Ohio, we're going to be consolidating because we don't have poll workers. And if we don't have poll workers, you bring it down to just a few. But where are those few voting places going to be located? That is something that the crews that we have now of volunteers are going to be watching, and they're going to be talking, and they're going to be raising up to accountability those boards of election. Now, in checking your own registration, ohvotes.org, that's a one-stop shop that we created so you can check your registration, register online. It links also to getting your absentee ballot application that you have to mail in, hard copy. And it also enables you to pledge to vote so that we can send you reminders and about any changes that might happen in deadlines for absentee ballots, because there may be changes in deadlines. And why should we help others too? I mean, we know why we need to vote, but why should we help others? Because other voices are not being heard in shaping these issues. And as we want to make sure that all of our communities are heard. Elected officials pay attention to communities that vote. And so we need to help everyone vote, everyone. And it's not just enough, as I said, to register people to vote. Because here in Ohio, we have an abominable voting record when it comes to registered people turning out. Barely over 50% of registered Ohioans voted in 2018, and there was no virus. And only 22% of Ohioans, young adult Ohioans who were registered, voted in 2018. And there was no excuse for that, like, oh, I might get sick. So we need to help people, especially young adults. And you need to be reaching out to them and asking them, are you registered? Do you know how to run an absentee ballot application? Do you know how to have your vote count? These are all the things that our volunteers are doing right now. They're getting correct information. They're knowing the correct deadlines and dates. They're postcard writing through Reclaim Our Vote. UU congregations with our UU the Vote process and teams are doing this all over the place. They're letter writing through Vote Forward to unregistered people. They're phone banking. They're text banking. They're sharing statewide issues and webinars and discussions. They're sharing local issues. Go into Vote 411 to see what those are. They're helping others check their registration by phone to counter this purging. They're holding online conversations like this, and I will give you all of these slides and the movie so that you can do this with others. They're giving stamps for ballot envelopes. Yes, that is a bar to sending back an absentee ballot, is the fact that that will take 2 to 3 stamps. And a lot of folk we know from the various research done, 1, won't go out to get stamps, or 2, don't even know how they could access stamps. We find this with young adults, that they don't know how to access the stamps to get them to put them on the ballot to mail it back. So they don't do it. We're holding drive-through registrations. We're going to be driving people to the polls or to drop off their absentee ballots. And we're going to be offering water and food and even rental chairs for folk that are lined up who need to vote in person, because you know the lines are going to be long. And yes, no printer to print the absentee ballot application, you better believe it. I have had churches back in the primary, they took a big envelope, they put a bunch of copies of the absentee ballot application in it, and they stapled it to the telephone poles in the neighborhoods and said, free to come get it. I got people right now in different neighborhoods in Toledo who are setting up little lemonade stand type things. Come get your registration form. Come get your absentee ballot form here. And people in the neighborhoods come by and get it. So yes, and some of our churches took absentee ballot applications to grocery stores and pharmacies and housing apartment buildings during the primary, so people could access that even though they didn't have a printer. Yes, indeed. And yes, that is a bar. That's a bar to voting. And voting does make a difference. This is what we're working with right now in terms of our voter coalition and why we need volunteers. We're doing UU the Vote with our Ohio Voter Rights Coalition, and you can sign up at that website, or that website below there. I'm hoping maybe somebody can share it in here. I'll share it in the come on. Well, I can't share it. Okay. I'll have to send this out to people then so I can put it into your chat so that you can copy down the website and see how to join up to do this. It's a little bit.ly down at the bottom there of the sign, bit.ly/UUJONOVOC Novak. So I'll ask people to follow up on that one. Thank you. But what are you going to do today? Talk to somebody, check your own registration, calling 3 others, especially young adults, or volunteer to help reach out and inform, protect the election, educate others, transportation, and support. Yes, Carol Anderson did a number of shows, interviews, and The Daily Show is in the is in Netflix. Yes. Okay. So I want to end up then. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. So are you registered for November? Do you have a cell phone? Do you want to check now? Are there other reactions or questions that you want to raise now in the couple of minutes we have left?
Hey, Joan, thank you for giving us this insight today and for suggesting that video. Again, it did make an impact on me. While we were on the video here with you, I did go to ohiovotes.org, and I'd already previously checked my registration. But I have a question for you after having watched that video. Yep. And I wanted to ask, is there any purging that you expect will occur in Ohio between now and the general election in November?
There was a September purge that was planned. And then there was a great deal of outcry against it. and digging into the regulations found that in Ohio, you cannot purge 90 days before a vote.
Very good.
Thank God.
Yes.
So the purging is planned for January.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So as long as you're registered now, there shouldn't be any reason why you could be deregistered, if you will. So that's good to hear.
Carol Anderson recommends checking it weekly.
Wow.
Before an election. Seriously. She recommends checking it regularly before an election because, as you saw in the video, there are even issues about the direct match of your name to what they have on the voter rolls and your ID. I have a space in my name. I check mine because that space might cost me issues. Van and Becelaere, a little space in the name. And if you get some poll workers that don't know what they're doing and they see a space on a voter roll, but no space on your driver's license, that's not a match, and you might be denied the vote. Check. Check to make sure that your ID and your voter registration match. Okay?
I saw something recently where they were talking about how the Postal Service was saying that you should allow, I think it was 14 to 21 days or something. I can't remember the exact date. So what is the safest actual absentee ballot date that we should do?
Good. Do your absentee ballot application now. Get it in now. Avoid the rush, avoid the confusion. That way you give those little boards of election time to put it in there now. And she's got it stamped. Yes, thank you, Jen. Get it in now. You will get your ballot then on October 6th or right soon after. Then send it back immediately. Vote immediately if you're voting by mail. Because yes, the post office says give them a week or even 10 days to get the ballot back to the boards of election. And it takes another week or 10 days after you apply for an absentee ballot for them to process it. So don't wait, don't wait. If you were waiting till October, you're already kind of behind the game. Okay. Now, officially, you can request an absentee ballot all the way up till October 27th. Don't do that. Don't do that. The post office can't get the application to the Board of Election, and the Board of Election cannot get the ballot back to you. So allow at least 2 to 2.5 weeks right now to hope for the whole process. Okay. And yes, you can check your ballot progress, your application online, and you can check it when they get their ballot, get your ballot in. For most counties, not for all. I mean, yes, they're required to do it, but some counties have some difficulty with that. That's why we have the Adopt a Board of Election plan right now, and a lot of our volunteers are working with the boards of election to see what they need. And if you can, apply to help the Board of Election become a poll worker if you're healthy and have, ability to put the, use the PPE and feel safe, because they need poll workers desperately. I mean, desperately. People like me can no longer do it. So they need other folk to step up. And checking ballot progress online, yes, absolutely excellent. And there is drop boxes in all of the counties, but we want more drop boxes, and we're fighting for that too right now on the policy side to get more drop boxes for people. And no, you cannot collect your neighbor's absentee ballots and take them to the drop box. You can take your neighbor to the drop box in your car in the back and have them put the absentee ballot in the drop box, but you can't do that, okay? You can't do that. And teenagers can be poll workers, you better believe it. College people can be poll workers. 17 years old, yes, you can be a poll worker, absolutely. 17 is great. And if you're going to be 18 by the election, make sure you're registered. I mean, you can be a poll worker if you're 17. 17 now you can sign up, but you do need to be 18 by the time of the election so you can register. Okay.
Hey, Joan, so first I just want to say thank you for today. It's great content. The video is great. There's probably more here than we can cover. And I know it's always a challenge to compress 90 minutes into a 45-minute window. And
That's
I
right.
think you did a great job. One thing I just rolling through my head before into the end here is that, when we talk about, when I looked at the video last night and watched it, one thing we thought was, well, this is unfair. And when the rabbit hole I started going down was, well, surely there were lawsuits, because when things are unfair, we go to the courts and we try and litigate. And what it seemed to be, and I didn't read it all, was that the courts kind of threw their hands up and say, like, even if it was fair, what do you want us to do at this point?
Right.
And it seemed to be that, and not just that issue, but, other issues like this. And I think, the tangential issue related to this is gerrymandering, right? Where, and the courts, I feel like, have kind of thrown their hands up at that too, right? And said, we're not dealing with that either. And my only, I guess, to kind of close the loop here, is what it really means is voting is even more important, because the only way through this is to legislate out of this.
That's right.
Because if the courts can't deal with it, then it only can be our elected officials left who can deal with this.
Right.
Okay. So and I know you talked about one House bill. Do you think, are there particular people or bills that are coming that will help support this?
Well, yes, there's a number of bills right now that are in the Senate, like Senate Bill 191, that would let us apply for an absentee ballot online, have it submitted online, or on a cell phone. But with the mess now in the House of Representatives, they're not coming back till September at the earliest. And the Senate has only one meeting left, and that's at the end of August. None of that would be in time to enable the boards of election to change processes in any way, shape, or form. So the laws we got now are the laws we're stuck with, which aren't great either, because our two-part absentee ballot process is confusing for a lot of folk. We found that out during the primary, remember? And that's why we have to educate people about absentee ballots so that they can vote safely. And no, sending in an absentee ballot application does not register you to vote. Hundreds, if not thousands of people thought that it did. And in the primaries, they sent those applications in and they were not registered. So they did not count. They did not count. And that's what we have to overcome. Okay.
You want to do we can take this as our closing quote if you want to read
this. This is our closing quote, yeah. Dorothy Day said, people say, what's the sense of our small effort? They cannot see that we must lay one brick at a time, take one step at a time, pass out 3 stamps to somebody at a time. A pebble cast into a pond causes ripples that spread in all directions. And each one of our thoughts, our words, our deeds, helping somebody get to the polls is like that. Because no one has a right to sit down and feel hopeless. There is simply too much work to do. Thank you, guys. Thank you for putting up with the time it takes for this too. And yes, I can share any of this stuff with anybody. I can give you the whole slide set if you want it.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Harmony UU podcast. Check us out online at harmonyuu.org for more details. You can also find us on Facebook. Just search Harmony UU. If you're in the Cincinnati area, please stop by one of our services on the first and third Sunday of each month at 10 a.m.